welcome to Screen Therapy Podcast, episode 20.5. I'm your host, Jason Schreurs. This episode is short but sweet. It's a chance to look back at some of the highlights of episodes 11 to 20. I first heard punk rock in grade 8, and it changed the course of my life. Listening to punk felt like I'd finally found the right key to unlock my brain. Punk rock and mental health have always been connected. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. Punk rock chose me, it saved me, it changed my life, and I don't know where I'd be or what I'd do without it. Members of the punk scene repeat these mantras again and again on this podcast. It's no coincidence. Okay, let's get started on the recap. On episode 11, I talked to Buzz Osborne of legendary sludge metal band Melvins about his flight anxiety and using psychological acupressure.
We hit the worst, by far the worst turbulence I've ever been in, and it goes on for hours. To the point where if you hadn't had your seatbelt buckled, you'd hit the ceiling. And over and over and over and over it does this. People are freaking out. At some point during that, I don't remember anything at all.
Our next episode, number 12, Devin Carson, vocalist of Chicago emo punk band Airstream Futures. I talked to her about living with premenstrual dysphoric disorder and the depression and suicidal ideation connected to it.
It's not just PMS. It's something that really, really affects your mental health, where it's an overwhelming feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, and just sadness and depression.
Episode 13 was a biggie for me. I had Jacob Bannon on the show from one of my favorite bands, Converge. Jacob talked about how he uses his music and art for therapy and to express his internal struggles.
I utilize art and music to find some sort of version of inner peace, or at least, at the very least, a healthy outlet for things that I'm feeling. That's what I've always used heavy music and artwork for. It's a healthy purge.
Episode 14 featured maybe the nicest guy on earth, Jason Hall, singer of Western Addiction, the San Francisco punk hardcore band. We talked about how Jason collapsed while he was jogging, the importance of mental health, and the concept of emotional intelligence.
I never talked about this stuff. I would just have had this episode and I would have just ate the feelings and kept going, you know? But now it's stopping me. It's saying no more, pay attention, or we're going to stop you.
Next up was a tandem episode. First, Neil Page of Baltimore, Maryland pop-punk band Panic Problem. Neil talked about living with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and also generalized anxiety disorder. He has found a way to balance his symptoms with a family life and being part of the punk scene.
I would not be on this planet without this community. No way. I'd be dead. That's for a fact. This community is the only place that I fit in. I experience that on a daily basis. Daily basis.
On that same episode, Katie Zaccardi, a wellness coach and podcast host who works with musicians.
You had to stay out late. If you didn't, you were not cool, and you also just weren't doing your job. You had to keep pushing yourself and never say no to opportunities, and always keep hustling and showing up even when you were exhausted. And I do not agree with that mindset or that mentality, and I think it's really damaging.
On episode 16, Brian McTernan, I'm sure you've heard that name before. He produced pretty much every band in the late 90s out of Salad Days, his studio. Brian has a new band called Be Well, which is almost the catchphrase of Scream Therapy. Be Well is a way for Brian to talk about battling depression through his life and how he's found a way out the other side.
And we went into the hospital. I mean, it's like the story out of an awful movie, but we're just walking and I'm feeling great, and we had breakfast, and then I walked through a door with the person and my mom stayed and the door closed behind me, and it was like, wait, what the fuck is going on? And I was locked up.
It was a pure delight to have Stacy D from Bad Cop on episode 17. Stacy talked about how she's recovered from addiction and mental health issues, and how every day is a new adventure for her, and how a positive mindset and healthy lifestyle helps her stay well.
Going through getting off of Xanax and what that did to my brain, it reduced me to being like a small child again. And I got so many answers on how to be well. And I'm on a constant journey now.
Up next was Johnny Boucher on episode 18. Johnny founded Hope for the Day, which is a nonprofit organization based in Chicago doing suicide prevention work. After Johnny's mentor and good friend took his life, he had to speak out about suicide, and hoped for the day it was born.
This shit's been going on for a long time, and until we got to a place where it was appropriately recorded, and we've been living, in the same dark corner that cancer was, and that HIV was at one point in time. All these things were hiding in these corners, impacting our lives, but we didn't know what we knew about it until someone got fucking fed up and said, you know what, enough's enough. I'm over this shit. I'm going to bring some light on this. And that, to me, is punk rock as fuck.
Episode 19 featured Christy Rode, who changed her name to the name of a Green Day song, which is pretty amazing. Christy talked about her journey of healing from sexual abuse and trauma. She is the vocalist of New York pop-punk band Choked Up, and has written 3 graphic novels about trauma, survival, sex, and love.
The second I started talking about more difficult stuff, but particularly healing from sexual violence and healing from sexual assault, that was when it was very clear what scenes didn't want to hear from me and what bands were just like, oh, this rhetoric again, But yeah, when it comes to we don't want to deal with your narrative, that's kind of what has affected my mental health through the years.
And finally, on episode 20, Stephen Gray from the Florida band Dikembe. Stephen talked about coping with grief after the sudden death of his mother and how her passing affected his depression and anxiety, as well as his manic behavior. Stephen talked about how playing music is a huge help in his healing.
After, years of therapy and medication, I was starting to feel okay. And then just out of nowhere, my mom passed, and it was just devastating. It completely just leveled my whole view on the world again.
If you want to check out any of the episodes 11 to 20, or all of them, go to soundcloud.com/screamtherapy or subscribe to Scream Therapy on your favorite podcast service. Scream Therapy also airs on CJSF in Burnaby, BC, Radio Humber in Toronto, CKMS in Waterloo, Ontario, and CJMP from right here in Powell River, BC. If you want to connect with me, message me at the SoundCloud page. I'd love to hear from you. Episode 21 is up in a couple of weeks and features Dr. Steven Danziger, who grew up in the New York punk scene in the late 70s and is now a specialist in trauma therapy. Thank you for listening to Scream Therapy. It means a lot to me. Until next time, take care and be well.